Hello, and thank you for joining us this morning for our Top Practices for Achieving Data Governance Excellence webinar. My name is Victoria Pelka, and I'd like to start off by going over the goals of our discussion today. In today's webinar, we will hear about common challenges surrounding the adoption of data governance and approaches to overcome them. We will also talk about how practical beats theoretical when it comes to governance implementation, and our panelists will talk about the practices they have or are using and what they've learned from their experiences. As we go through our discussion topics today, we do encourage you to enter any questions that you might have in the questions box in the GoToWebinar panel. We'll monitor the questions and leave time at the end of our webinar to answer any of them. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists. Today we have Jeffrey Robinson, Vice President of Information Systems at Kemper. Jeffrey leads the Enterprise Information Management team that's responsible for providing data and technology services and expertise to support Kemper's reporting, analytic, and decision support activities. We also have with us Kevin Shannon, Global Head of Enterprise Data Governance at Dun & Bradstreet. Kevin has more than 20 years of experience conceiving and implementing enterprise data management strategies and technology solutions, defining information architecture, and so much more. We also have with us Keith Jansen, Head of Data Management at Travelers. Keith's areas of responsibility have included IT app development, information delivery, emerging technologies, insurance operations, data management, and R&D. And moderating our discussion today is Ernst Renner, CEO and Managing Partner here at NEOS. Ernst has worked extensively with C-level executives in business transformation, data, and technology modernization and strategy for insurance carriers and financial services companies. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Ernst.
Thanks, Victoria. So thank you all for dialing into the session today. The main gist of this session, as Victoria went through the goals and introduction, is to talk about data governance, and the panel that has graciously agreed to participate today are expert in making governance and data management real. So everybody is going to come from a different perspective, and I think that the hope here is that we make the discussion practical and realistic to those who've made the time to join. So we're going to start things off with a question that often surprises us on is data really a corporate asset? And that question has been filtered around for the last kind of 20 years, and it's gathered a little bit of gravity as we've gone on. So we can probably just progress through and just put all three items up here. Through the last 25 years, right, we've kind of gone from talking about management reports and how internally the business is operated to then an evolution of how data flows between different lines of business, again, very internally oriented, how the operation is doing, how we integrate our business, to today, where it's not just the flow within the business, it's taking in outside data, it's helping position companies into different, more strategic areas. And so I think we all know this, that it's on the call that data is a corporate asset. So it's just become more important, and there really is no business anymore that operates without a focus on data and how important it is. The question there, though, is with this emphasis and this required asset, how do you really manage it, and how do we still gain viability and visibility into the business to get sanctioned to work and operate and treat a corporate asset the way it should be treated? So the intent of this slide is just to sort of tee up that evolution and kind of pose those questions of how do we get a seat at the table, how do we make data governance and management real, and how do we treat it as such. So that kind of leads us into our first set of questions for the panel. This set of questions really talks about where the individual panelists are, where their companies are in terms of data governance, what is driving them to better understand and manage the data that they have, what are the key business drivers, and how do you get a seat at the table? And we use the word credible seat at the table. So let's get away from data governance as an expense and move into looking at data as an asset integrated into the business. So with that, I wanted to, we have Jeff, Keith, and Kevin on the phone. They're gonna chip in on these questions, kind of hit them one at a time, and I think we'll start things off with Jeff. You know, you can talk to these points from your experience at Kemper.
Yeah, thanks, Ernst. Yeah, at Kemper, we're I think probably a little earlier along in this journey of enterprise data governance than the other panelists. While we've had a flavor of governance for probably 7 or 8 years now, it's been more driven at a technology level where we need to standardize how our systems are communicating, because we adopted a service-oriented architecture, and the services on that that are consumed need to see and consume information the same way. So we spent a lot of time standardizing data, but not really getting into it as really an enterprise asset and looking at the information that way. It was more of an operational back office type of a feel to it. So what over the last, back in right around 2014 time frame, the company had been going through a consolidation, and in 2014, it just kind of, the consolidation went on steroids, where we went from having a series of really individual insurance companies selling products to various segments of the marketplace, to really operating as a single insurance company and bringing all the products kind of into as a product family. So operating as a single company instead of one company, instead of multiple companies with just kind of being sold under the Kemper umbrella. So when that occurred, what ended up happening is through 2014, there was a lot of frustration in that, how do we measure ourselves? We do simple things like in insurance, you measure your retention, you're measuring your loss ratios, your frequency, your severity, all of it's just the basic insurance things that have been around for decades, and how you measure your results. But we weren't doing it the same. Depending on which business segment you were in or where you came from, you did things differently, or you called things different things. So I think that the catalyst for us to really get into data governance and focus on it was really that change, and then the inability for the company to communicate and function the way it was. A lot of frustration at the executive level when they would receive things and not really knowing how it came about or where it came from. So I think that as you look at it, was really the catalyst for it, and looking at it more as, we've got to change the way we think about data, almost like treating it as a cultural change had to occur in order for us to be able to you speak one language and really truly become one company.
That's really good perspective, and I think a lot of the folks that have joined on the call are kind of in that same boat and have those same questions and challenges. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Keith, you want to chip in on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, similar mindset to what Kemper's dealing with, I think, in creating an enterprise asset and enterprise flow. So we have separate businesses, and we have separate data governance and data management teams. So really a focus for us is how do we have one vision of Travelers data? And I think that's the catalyst, setting the direction and foundation for our direction moving forward. What we do have that enterprise adoption. This stuff is critical path for everything that we do at Travelers and everything that we will do going forward. It's not only a critical function from a technology perspective, it's a critical function from a business perspective. This is now asked for at Travelers, and that stems for the results and the value that people have started to see over the years as to, if you do this correctly and you make it flexible enough, the value that it brings to the table is always worth it. It's part of our data strategy. Right, so if we talk about our data assets and what we're trying to build out from a Travelers perspective, data management, data governance, and quality is just an essential part of our data strategy. And I call it not even our data strategy, it's part of our business strategy. So as we lay out business plans, you'll see the mention of governance in our business plan. And, you know, Ernst, when we worked together 10 years ago, that was not going to happen, right? It was, what the heck is data governance? And so you've come a long way in that sense. So we're really trying to focus on agility in the governance space now, especially in the personal insurance space. Folks see the value, and the less intrusive you can be, and the less hindrance you could be on progress, the better the data governance process is going to be. So our focus is on the agility aspect of it. It's a necessary function, but it's also a function that people understand. So that agility aspect to be on demand and on call from a governance perspective is key. And jumping down to bullet 2 on the business drivers, you know, I think it used to be business drivers around ensuring quality, right? Ensuring that, you know, we're reporting out on things correctly, ensuring that we understand our numbers. Our new drivers are really speed and agility, right? People understand that if we do governance well, creating new products, rolling things out are around speed to market. So that's a key business driver that we're marching toward in the governance space. And, you know, how we continue to prove progress here and what techniques we use, it's really, you know, prove the value. Let's show the success criteria. Let's show how we can add speed to market in our products by doing what we do here in data governance space. And obviously, we don't want to forget about the accuracy and the quality associated with the numbers as well.
That's really good, and I think I actually wrote down a question for you, and I want to, at some point, I'll bring that question up and make sure we're on the proper timing for both how you got the buy-in when there wasn't any 10 years ago, and then, you know, more on the metrics, and we'll cover that in the next set of questions. Kevin Shannon, you're on the line. I wonder if you've got the interesting perspective from Dun & Bradstreet and from financial services background. Welcome, and I hope you can chip in on this.
Yeah, so you guys can hear me okay, right?
Yep.
Great. So yeah, I'm Kevin Shannon, currently Global Head of Data Governance here at Dun & Bradstreet. I've been with D&B for a little over a month. A little bit about myself. I actually started out in this space quite by accident, going back to 2010. I was brought into AIG Enterprise Risk Management with responsibility for data, and what I realized after short order there was the organization really needed to have a data management discipline. So sort of, you know, data governance, soup to nuts, data stewardship, robust data quality program, and what have you. So AIG is, you know, the place where I honestly earned my stripes in this space, and what I mean by that is, you know, a lot of learning on my part, right? This is not an easy space to operate in. In particular, I think, you know, you've already heard some of the other panelists talk about the fact that, you know, you have to make this measurable and feeling real to people. And, you know, so those are some of the things that I learned early on in my interactions with the business and selling a data governance program. You know, in short, what I found is that, you know, while the business, you know, they really, you know, more or less understood that data governance, a good program around that is a good thing. When we started to get into the next level of the conversation around, well, you know, if we're going to spend $500,000, let's say, on XYZ for your program, you know, what's our ROI there, right? And so in the early going, you know, these were some of my, you know, learning points, and how do I orient my conversation with the business? And I can share some of that with you guys, you know, later in this conversation. After AIG, I went to S&P Rating Services. They had I guess the very beginnings of a data governance program there. I would describe it as being at a level 1.0. So the concept of data stewardship was, you know, it was in place, but very much siloed. So in short, what I was brought in to do there was to elevate the maturity of the data stewardship program there, and then subsequent to that, elevate the maturity of the overall enterprise data governance program and help spread that throughout McGraw-Hill Financial subsidiaries. So again, lots of learning there as well, lots of, you know, information or learning points that I had, you know, brought to the table in my time at AIG. And now I'm here at Dun & Bradstreet. And more or less getting to your, I guess, your second bullet, what I'm finding here at D&B is, like most places, the business or value prop behind having an enterprise data governance organization, a data governance office, is in addressing regulatory needs, right? But now D&B, and I think other companies as well, are starting to get a little bit beyond that. It's in the rearview mirror somewhat. It's still, quite a bit of the work that we do here at Dun & Bradstreet is aligned to, to regulatory affairs. But at the same time, people are asking the question, what's next for data governance? And this is what I've been brought in to help out with. And some of the things that I'm looking at as I'm learning about this organization is that data governance can and will play a very, very important role, being involved closely in a proactive way with our front office. So, for example, we have a sales team. Very often, they're asked questions about our data that goes into the data governance space. In this day and age, it's incumbent upon organizations, when they're purchasing data from a third party, to have done a level of due diligence in terms of understanding the quality and reliability behind that data that they're purchasing. It's not enough to just say, well, I purchased the data from Dun & Bradstreet, so it's on them. That's just not really the case. So, our sales force will often get questions around how do we ensure the reliability of our data, and so we're stepping into that space to help educate them, help guide them through some of those conversations, even participate with them in those conversations with clients. And this is an area where it's very evident to the business the value that the Data Governance Office brings to the table. In terms of techniques, I have a mantra that that I'm constantly sharing with people, and it's keep it real. And again, that gets back to some of my early experiences here. Some of the other panelists here already said, you've got to make sure that you're not putting a heavyweight data governance process in place. I can't stress that enough. If you want to blow up your data governance program, make it heavy. I guarantee you that it isn't going to work out. So you've got to find ways to be plugged in, yet not be a heavyweight organization. So take advantage of governance bodies that already exist and plug into those conversations and bring your piece to the pie, if you will, into that conversation. Use industry models. There's something called the data maturity model, for example, that resonates well with the business when you sit with them and you talk about an industry external model that we can measure ourselves against and measure ourselves against our peers. So I think those are just in brief some of the basic tools and mantra around what will establish the basis for a successful data governance program.
No, that's really good. You guys had all brought up different aspects, and I'm going to ask a tough question in our 2 minutes that we got left in this segment. So both Keith and Kevin, you talked about experiences of trying to break, you got to break in at one point, and you both outlined that there was a start for that. And then Jeff is breaking in. I wonder if you guys can chip in on what did you do to kind of break the seal, if you will, to get that seat at the table when you first started. If you could share a little bit on that. Keith, you want to?
Yeah, I can definitely start. At the time when we were kicking off, the industry buzzwords helped, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, you need data quality, you need data governance, you need data management. So we took advantage of a lot of those buzzwords as we kicked off, going years back. What we try to do is take advantage of the pain and suffering as well, right? So you look for those examples where it's causing our business headaches, it's causing our business to suffer.
Do you have an example of one?
I have a couple of examples. I'm hesitant to share some of the details, but there was, complete numbers that were off being escalated and sent to certain executives that meant actually different things than what were being proposed. So we took advantage of those examples, and we said, hey, if we had this in place, just think of the value that this would bring. And this is just an example that we know about. What about the 500 that we don't know about? So once we got that buy-in, it start really small and start really flexible, right? Let's not try and boil the ocean. It's a thin slice on something that's high priority. Improve the value as you test and learn. Because, you know, I agree that there's some great industry stuff that's out there. There's some great tools that are out there, but you have to make it your own. You know, if we try to plug in all the white papers at Travelers, we'd fail miserably. So you have to be flexible and make it your own.
Kevin, you know, how about that? I know it. You know, you brought up S&P Rating Services, and they had kind of the initial shot at stewardship on the business side, and then it had to gain some traction and momentum and speed, and you were in there at that transition point. Can you name one thing that kind of comes to mind that you feel comfortable in sharing that kind of flipped the switch?
Yeah, actually, you know, I can talk a bit about S&P, but also, you know, I think back to my time at AIG when, you know, when I had first convinced myself that we absolutely had to have data stewardship as a discipline at AIG Enterprise Risk, and it took a little bit of doing to get the business to agree to that. There was a little bit of a feeling that, you know, is it really our job, and so on and so forth. And we can talk about some of the challenge with that separately if we have more time. But what I did, this is one of the mistakes I made early on. So I convinced them that we needed data stewardship. The data stewards were named, and the first thing that I did is I started to set up data stewardship meetings. And, you know, in the beginning it was okay, right? Because the data stewards, obviously, they wanted to know what's our charter, you know, what's next, and so on. But what I found, you know, within, let's say, by the second or third meeting, it was becoming evident to me that this really isn't it. You know, getting these data stewards together to talk about data, it just wasn't working. You know, this, like, how much can you really, you know, get in a room and talk about? You know, it's just, it loses its, you know, its real meaning. You're sort of pontificating to one another, if you will. Where this, at least in my experience, and in particular with data stewardship, where the rubber meets the road, okay, I decided to abandon those meetings. We just had quarterly meetings where we would, you know, share some of our stewardship disciplines across our stewardship network. Where it became highly relevant was in getting those stewards, those subject matter experts, embedded in projects. Okay, that's when the light bulb went on for everybody. Okay, that's when people on both sides, both from the business standpoint, where that steward had this realization that, yes, you know, I am a critical member of this particular project for this organization. I'm bringing a lot to this conversation. On the IT side, you know, they were getting the level of information that that they needed. And so it really took on, stewardship in and of itself took on a lot of very real meaning to people there. Now, I mentioned early on that, you know, the business was kind of saying, well, they really, you know, they felt that, here's another mistake I made, honestly. You know, I started the conversation out by saying, listen, every business that's actually operating has data stewards. So I guarantee you we have data stewards here. We, you know, we need to name who they are. We need to formalize it. And when they pushed back on me, they said, well, you know, if we already have them, then what do we need them for? And, you know, I struggled with that a little bit at first. And then, you know, what I came to realize over a little bit of time is that it really is all about establishing the accountability, that making that accountability real also, okay, making that part of their performance objectives and how they're measured at the end of the year. That eliminates the ability for people to opt out of that conversation. So even if Joe was more or less acting as a steward all along, by having Joe have that accountability assigned to him in a very real way, it eliminated that ability for Joe to say, I'm too busy to come to this meeting, or I'm just going to delegate to Johnny, and, you know, Johnny shows up to the meeting and hasn't a clue about that particular data domain. Things along those lines, the ability to opt out. So those two things, I would say, establishing the accountability and plugging directly into projects is key to getting good traction to get things started.
Thanks. Jeff, I'm not going to be able to get to you on this point, but I want to circle back because you got that interesting perspective right at the end of the session. So I'll let you off the hook on this one for now. Moving and tying into what all three folks brought up, we're going to leave you, we're just kind of a couple of slides that I'm not going to talk to because I want to speed through time, but we talked about metrics and process and where organizations are. They're all at different levels. We're going to leave you with the folks on the line a maturity model that you can look at, and I encourage you to kind of take a hard look at it and see where you really are, because it's kind of understanding where you're at and where you're going to go. We'll flip to the next slide just because of timing. I could talk about it forever. The interesting thing that was brought up in that question that kind of should resonate is that maturity shouldn't be looked at only at how you execute a process or maybe even the end result. For those organizations that have an existing data governance practice, and I think Keith could acknowledge this, sometimes it's the perception, right? So if you have a heavy organization, as Kevin brought up, and it's operating, how you're executing through your maturity in your data governance operations, the perception to your business partners and those executing the process maybe that will be indicators that it's heavy. So if perception is poor, a lot of times the indicator might be around that the process is too heavy or the value proposition isn't strong enough. So I'll leave you folks with that. Every section we're going to have a little segment like that you can think about and ponder. So we'll move on to the charge on courageously into our next group of questions here. This set of questions is really about Kevin brought up the point of keeping it real, and that's what this is. And I think each panelist has got a different perspective on it. Governance a lot of times equated to process, right? It's equated to metrics. Some of that process is hard and fast. Some is more flexible. But a lot of companies struggle with what metrics are meaningful and important, and how do we measure them. And others kind of struggle with, well, you know, we've got industry frameworks, we've got all sorts of stuff. Do we take on the whole piece and swallow it and run with it, or how do we work with it? So this section is really around how do you take data governance and make it your own. So the 4 questions presented here: at what level of governance process makes sense to your organization, and did you use? What metrics do you use to measure those? You know, maybe just a couple of samples, if you guys can share, are the most important. And what techniques are you using to advance that level of efficiency that we just talked about? Or are you at a level that you're just operating and humming along really well? And then the last piece is, are you using any tools or techniques to help execute your data governance operation? So with that, I'm gonna give Kevin the first shot here to kind of hit that. Kevin, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. So yeah, I guess the way I'll answer this question, I'm just going to kind of answer, I think, all 4 of your bullet points at one time as I discuss this. So in terms of process, we already, mentioned the fact that you need to keep it lightweight. Here's another mistake I made that I'll share with you guys briefly. In the beginning, I was very theoretical with my conversations with the business around the need for data governance. And here's the bottom line, okay? I can tell you that the business understands that there is a need for data governance, okay? What you need to do and want to do is, and all the business really cares about, is what do I need to do and when do I need to do it, okay? So I encourage you guys to think of it along those lines. And again, that aligns, in my opinion, very, very well to the mantra of keeping it real. So I would encourage you, if you're not using tools, some kind of a workflow management tool behind your data governance process, and standardizing your data governance process so that, so that regardless of which domain you're talking about, it more or less feels and looks the same, I would encourage you to think about that, okay? At the end of the day, that's what the business is looking for. If they need to make a decision on something, they simply want to know what it is, what's the impact, and what do they need to do next, okay? In the last few organizations that I've been in, they're agile shops. That presents a little bit of an issue, if you will, when it comes to a data governance discipline, because those 2 things can be at odds. right? You want to be nimble, you want to move quickly, show incremental results for the business in a quick fashion. How do you govern well in a space like that? And what we've come up with is what we've termed a data debt, DEBT log. And the purpose of that is as we iterate through the agile life cycle, we do not want to be inhibitors of progress, yet we still want to govern. Okay, so what we do is when there are cases where, because there are good business drivers that that basically say, listen, we need to put aside this one particular best practice or principle for the moment because we have a speed to market issue here. We need to get ahead of our competition, whatever the case may be. Well, from a data governance standpoint, how do you ensure you come back to those things and address them eventually? I think what most of us have found, throughout our careers is people mean well. They say, yeah, we'll come back and we'll fix that, but then that day sort of never comes. By having a log where you're tracking the quote-unquote data debt and measuring that risk across 3 dimensions, regulatory risk, reputational risk, operational risk, you've got something that you can use to track areas where there's been good business reason to put something aside for the moment, and you can come back to it as part of that agile process and pop things off the stack and get them added into the software development lifecycle. And I've found that methodology to be very, very successful. The other thing is I often get questions around metrics. What are the right metrics? And what I've seen throughout my time in this space is that people tend to produce a lot of numbers, and by and large, business, especially senior leadership, don't know what story these metrics are really telling. They're very meaningless to them. So I follow what's called the goal question metric methodology, which again I feel keeps things very, very real. And the whole intent behind that methodology is exactly as it sounds. You sit with folks, in particular senior leaders, talk to them about what their data pain points are, orient that conversation to what would your goals look like in terms of what the data experience looks and feels like to you and your organization here, okay? Once you've laid out those, let's say, 4 or 5 goals, then define the questions that you would need to answer in order to know whether or not you're achieving those goals. And once you've agreed upon what those, the right set of questions are, then define the metrics that answer those questions. And in that way, when you're putting a dashboard in front of somebody and you've gone through that process with them, those metrics feel very real. They're able to tie it back to exactly what this is telling them in terms of this organization or the support that they're getting from your organization is providing and whether it's moving in the right direction. That all make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I want to we'll true it up on kind of the next slide. I think it kind of resonates and ties together. But I think that's really good advice, tying everything back to really what's important to the business and making it, again, making it real and relevant, right? Keith, what have you seen in this area, and what have you guys done?
Kevin had a lot of similar points that I think we're trying to make, so I won't beat on those points, but a couple other different perspectives, right? As I mentioned before, we're adopted, we're rather mature when it comes to especially line of business, data governance and stewardship, but we still have our work cut out for us. And one of the things that we realized and processes that we're trying to put in place, and I think folks have hit on this earlier, is the idea that governance is everybody's duty, right? And someone mentioned before that there's always groups that exist that are doing some level of governance, and it's tapping into those folks and really driving to it. So that's a theme that we're latching onto here. As we talk about being more agile, especially, that means more people doing the work. So we have our core set of stewards that are driving these exercises for us. But we also have these ideas of federated stewards that live in the businesses and are accountable, but they have their day jobs that they're focused on. Any initiative that we have going on at Travelers, stewards engage, right? And they have specific responsibilities associated with not only data governance, but lineage, data quality, all aspects of data management to facilitate that. And that was a critical component for us to move to a more agile level. When it comes to how we measure and communicate, I think we were caught in the same boat as a lot of folks. We just wanted to throw number of metrics out there. We govern 450 attributes, and we save the world on these 3 projects because we know everything about them and how they tie back to the enterprise. In my mind, those are fun, but they're kind of worthless, right? So we're going through an exercise now to really move away from those types of metrics and really move into, because we went through this process, are we able to look across everything? Are we able to tie the connections? When issues arise, are we able to understand the lineage associated with it, the impacts from a business value perspective, the impact to the business perspective when things don't happen? And governance is critical to creating that vision and that map throughout our enterprise to do that. So those are the type of metrics we're looking to start to do. They're hard. Because they're not straightforward, but that's the new maturity level in 16 that we'll kind of be marching towards. Go ahead.
No, but for the sake of staying on agenda and timetable, I wanted to take what you just said and tie that to Jeff and bring Jeff into the conversation, because his organization is in a different, they're just in a different life cycle right now. And one of the key things that you just brought up, and I think Kevin brought up before, was kind of the operational roles and the people involved. So you've got this kind of federated core set of stewards, federated or matrix, I would say, right, within the business where people participate in it. And I guess the point with Jeff, and I'd like to tie him in on this, is whether you call them stewards, there are people in the organization that are actually doing the work. They just might not be tied into a formal structure. And Jeff, does that resonate with you, where you've got really like subject matter experts in the organization, whether they're in IT or whether they're in the business? How do you guys do that similar type of work, ensuring that data is not overly redundant or people are clear on where to go to get the right data?
Yeah, we have a similar, I guess, experience, but it's probably a little less formal than than what Kevin and Keith have talked about. I think, have learned more from experience, where we've taken on some, IT had taken on some fairly large projects to retire some legacy systems, implement some new core platforms, and what we end up with at the end of some of those early projects was a data architecture that was, I think saying it's suboptimal was probably, being kind to it. And then my team, as well as our data analyst group, our analytics group, and other data analysts throughout the company were there, kind of left cleaning up the mess that ensued. So as with working with our PMO, our project management office, we have really been able to inject what would essentially be stewards, but really those people that are the subject matter experts of a particular domain. And we've been able to prevent a lot of the kind of the back end cleanup, I guess you could say, of data as it comes down from as the projects go live. So definitely a lot less formal, but I think it has it changed a little bit more in our culture, where you're starting a new project. When you start in the planning and coming up with a strategy and architecture behind what you're going to do, there are much more involvement around those people that work with data, those people that have to live with the results. Definitely. But definitely similar experiences to what Keith was just saying. Without them involved, you end up with a lot of chaos on the back end. And I think some of that chaos is in a lot of ways some of the catalyst that has brought about data governance at our organization. Trying to intermix a lot of legacy system data with some of our new enterprise systems definitely is a challenge, and without governing that data, it becomes extremely difficult, especially if you leave it up to each individual data consumer. You end up with a lot of people showing up with the the typical 10 people show up to a meeting and you have 12 different answers to a question. So definitely trying to wrangle that into a trying to put some sense around that sanity is one of the drivers.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that perspective, and I think that people who've listened in should too, because it's the work is always being done in organizations around stewardship, and then there's a point where kind of the crux happens where you got to transition into more of a formalized state, especially when you're going through integration of lines of business or systems consolidation or whatever. And tactically, people are doing that work, and now it's kind of getting into that next stage. And really, I think a really important aspect to the conversation. On the next slide, that kind of this really talks about taking a framework and making it real, and that when you take frameworks, whether it's one that we're showing here on the slide or from DAMA or what have you, it's guidelines and not a gospel. So what this is really explaining is that the important piece, and Kevin touched on it, was aligning what could be considered as value drivers from a data governance perspective have to be lined up to specific business goals, strategies, and outcomes. And those are related to and created in kind of a linear, well, in a format that reports the right level of information and metrics for accountability to the right level of executive sponsors and business partnerships. So all we're offering, or what we're presenting on this slide, you can take away and take a look at it, is that there's a linkage between the business goals and objectives and what you're actually doing in your data governance operation. You pick and choose what you want to implement based on where your organization is in whatever framework you like, but I think that the biggest key takeaway here is that you do have to build that value linkage back to what the organizations have said. And I think that, unless I'm incorrect, I kind of heard tones of that from everybody on the panel, that's really become, if not the thing that breaks the seal and moves you into that next level of maturity, or it gets you that buy-in. So how effective you are doing that really kind of mandates where you end up. So our next group of questions, and this is kind of our last set. Really here we're talking about, it's a little bit of future state and real world demands and where everything kind of comes together, right? So what is the right level of implementation and cadence and performance you need when you have the real world weighing in? So, in financial services, we've got BCBS 239, which, FYI, even from an insurance perspective, is a really interesting view of data and how externals are looking at it. DOL, a whole bunch of things, and then there's kind of the bigger things like customer centricity and digital transition and omni-channel. So the questions to the panel, and we've got really 50 minutes in the webinar, so we got to keep this actually kind of brief because I think we might have some questions at the end from the group. So what are the real world issues you guys are all facing? How do the goals tie into the actions you've taken in your strategy? And you might have talked to some of that already. And then what are some of the macro trends that you see? And that might be maybe the place to focus. What are the things that you see coming into your organization that'll make you change or rethink the way that you're governing data now? So for that, I wanted Keith's guest to my right here in the office. So I'm going to look to Keith maybe for the first spot.
You got it, yeah. I think we hit on a lot of the first couple questions, right, around complexity is an issue that we're dealing with. And you hit on some of the regulatory type things that we're dealing with. Third-party data, more precise segmentation in products, more advanced algorithms that our data is being leveraged by. All those you have to take into account in maturing your data quality effort. The other goal and action that we're trying to focus on is just speed to market and agility. And I'll just leave it as simple as the only way you're going to be able to handle speed and agility is knowing what you have, right? And governance is key to knowing what you have. And that third piece is where I'll spend a minute on, right? Digital, customer. These are platforms that we've created in platforms, and really trying to figure out what the heck to do there, right? We're leveraging big data, and we're bringing in a ton of, massive data sets. Speed and real-time, handling of these data is critical to our business strategies and plans going forward. So our focus really has been here is, let's not impede that discovery process, right? We got to figure all this stuff out and figure out how it fits into our business. And we know getting ahead of it and having clear data management strategies and governance aligned to it is important, but we also can't slow anything down. So it's more about getting involved, knowing exactly what's coming through the door, and creating those initial catalogs, and how the data you're leveraging and those catalogs are leveraging are tied to specific business initiatives that you're doing. Catalog of data, but also catalog of SMEs, right? You're not going to be able to go through every attribute on, a 100 million, attribute data set. You're going to have to rely on folks that know it and how it ties back to business initiatives to really get started. So that's how we're trying to handle these new types of data environments and complexity that we're dealing with here at Travelers.
Awesome. Yeah, the key not impeding discovery is an important aspect for sure. Kevin, we've got a couple minutes. You want to weigh in on the topic?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about this big data space, and this is something that I'm currently immersing myself within here at D&B. So I think we talked about it a little bit already. You don't want to inhibit the business from being able to do their job and their work, and in particular, we have a Cloudera environment here. We're pulling in data from all over the place. And from a governance standpoint, that obviously presents itself with some issues. Are we pulling in anything with personally identifying information, credit card numbers, social security numbers, and what have you? Now, as I said earlier, we do not want to be seen by this organization as bureaucratic and holding back progress. At the same time, we have a role, an important role here within this organization to make sure that we don't get burned by something going wrong, like somebody accidentally sends out a file that has social security numbers in it or something along those lines. And what I'm looking at right now, and I'm feeling pretty confident about, is that we will be able to bring some technology to the table there to help us out from an EDG standpoint in that space. I don't want to give anyone the impression that I'm a big believer in like a tool for everything, because that's not the case at all. But I do look at this space. Let's say I guess an analogy would be a carpenter, right? A carpenter needs to have a hammer and saw to get his or her work done, and it's similar in this space. And so what I'm looking at for in terms of governing a space like our Cloudera environment is what can I have on the back end that's profiling the data, okay? What level of data discovery can I have where I can see places where, oh gee, it looks like there are SSNs in there, it looks like there are credit card numbers in there. Let's take a look at that, right? So being proactive, positioning ourselves proactively, but not being in front of the business with some heavyweight bureaucratic process where a human being needs to evaluate every data point that's coming into this organization before it can possibly get put into that environment. Yeah.
No, that's a really important aspect, and I'm curious, Jeff, we've got a few minutes left in here. What are you seeing from your perspective and from where you guys are at Kemper?
Yeah, I think probably similar to what Keith and Kevin have said again is, we've kind of taken the approach to, we only want to govern what really, needs to be governed. We don't really get in the way of people bringing in additional information. We probably have less of a concern about bringing in personally identifiable information from the outside, because that's typically not what we would see our business bringing in to kind of integrate and work within our internal data. We look at kind of prioritizing what would be governed as things. Well, where are we feeling pain? And I think it was Keith that said something about this earlier. Is you're kind of looking at where are the issues that we're having, and in our case, it's really been, our focus has kind of been front office stuff, working with our sales and marketing organization, but also working at a KPI, or really enterprise metrics. You know, retention has been a huge one for us, and coming up with that that right calculation so that everybody kind of measures, you know, how well we're retaining business the same way. So each of our products are, you know, it's an apples to apples a type of comparison. I also think as we look forward into the future, you know, one of the big areas for us is this our new system deployments. We continue to retire and consolidate systems, and having the definitions around and the data governed to as that occurs has proven to be you know, one of the, I think when I look at what we're doing in the governance program right now, I mean, that's one of it's a key driver behind some of the data that we are taking on to govern, and making sure that as we deploy those new systems, they follow the standards, that we're able to kind of seamlessly integrate this, the new platforms, and sunset the old platforms with really minimal impact to the information consumers downstream. So the more we've been able to standardize, the better we have been able to do that. And I think that the change management within the organization, at least as far as the data management goes, has been significantly helped by that.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that change management and communication piece up. I think that's a really important capability in the adoption of governance. And I should have brought that up in one of the previous slides, Jeff, but you're absolutely right that, you know, communicating the change management, communicating and executing a change management practice, I think, even if done unconsciously, is a really critical aspect of moving the ball forward. We have a summary slide that I'm going to touch just on the 3 main bullets on, and then Victoria, we have some questions, I think, right? So the takeaways, and you can read the subs underneath, I think if they trace back well to what the panelists have said, you're not alone. A lot of these challenges exist and are common. I think we've heard that throughout. That practicality beats theory every time, and that's a lot different than it was 10 or 15 years ago, when it was really a lot of theory-based governance frameworks that really kind of clogged up the works of operations and gave governance a bad name. And that there are different ways to implement governance, and that it really has to be customized to what you can do and what you're sanctioned to do, and at what level of trust that you've earned with your business partners and strategy. So, you know, I think, Victoria, if we have some questions, maybe we can field a few before we wrap it up in 5 minutes or so.
Yeah, absolutely. We had an interesting question come through and posed to the panelists. If you had to reboot governance in another company, what would you do differently based on your experiences?
Well, I'll take the first crack at that one. Definitely, I think we've hit on a lot of these points already, right? It's look for those pain points. It's identify the value, the business drivers that you're trying to align to, and it start small and test and learn, right? Because you're going to want to create a, you know, Ernst, you have a couple of, you know, Six Sigmas, rapid governance implementation. There's different methodologies, right? But you're going to have to test and learn and figure out what fits and what works for the organization. So if I was starting from scratch or starting over again, that's kind of the 1, 2, 3 step I take, and not try and force one practice into fruition. And the 4th step would be, let's find the folks that are doing the role and let's tap into them. And that's probably should be step 1. Yeah.
Good. Kevin or Jeff, you got anything?
Yeah, I'll share one. Goes back to S&P Rating Services. When I joined S&P in 2012, the organization that I ran was data stewardship, and data stewardship was a full-time job there at S&P, an actual job description, and those data stewards rolled up solid-lined, you know, into my organization. What, you know, on paper, you know, some of the decisions that were made early on were driven by the fact that at S&P Ratings, the business wanted to get out of the business of having to handle data, the procurement of the data, the measurement of quality, the governance processes that need to be put in place, and what have you. So So what was different about that organization is that sitting in between IT and the business was an organization called Data Strategy and Operations, one of which pillars was mine, which is data governance and stewardship. So what would I change? Well, initially, I would say that the DSO, without any question, met the goals of its charter, which was to take the responsibility for data out of the hands of the business and let them concentrate on their core competency, which is producing ratings. But what happened over time is the business started to distance themselves. So by the time I came into the conversation in 2012, they already had distanced themselves from the data conversation. Oh, data is handled by the DSO. We don't have to worry about that. And what I found is that the data stewards in my organization had also become disconnected from the business. So what I would change there, and what I'm happy to find here at Dun & Bradstreet, is that the stewards are embedded in the business, and they're dotted lined into a data governance office, like I have here at D&B, where the data governance office is establishing that cadence for the data stewards, keeping things aligned and not siloed. But the stewards being embedded in the business are keeping that conversation in the business where it belongs.
Good. And Jeff, you've got a perspective of, you kind of got maybe almost a reboot opportunity now, right? If you want to launch this stuff, what's your take?
Yeah, I think I would kind of maybe key off of one of the things that Keith had said about starting small. I would probably spend more time up front doing a proof of value before we did a full kickoff. Essentially kind of do a pilot program, really kind of focused on getting a obviously showing the value, but showing the value really to the executive team. Because as we kicked off, we had support from the executive team, but I wouldn't say I had broad level support from an executive team. Meaning, I'm not sure all the line of business executives really were in line with it. I had the CFO and the CIO, though they, while very influential, I don't think I had really broad acceptance. So what you've got is a much more, it was much more resource intensive when we kicked off, and I think that there was a little bit more skepticism. So definitely doing a proof of value up front, and I would agree that working out the processes as you go along, because there are many different approaches to this, and I think as we've kind of gone along, we've almost on a fairly regular basis continue to tweak what we're doing to try and make it so our process works better and more efficient, less obtrusive to the business.
Good. Well, we got 2 minutes left, so Victoria, you got another question, and I know what it is, but I want to hear it from you, and then I'll pose it to the panel.
Absolutely. What do you feel are the most important data governance related processes to establish up front to ensure successful adoption of data governance?
So we got 2 minutes, and I would say I'm going to limit you guys, if you can, to respond to that in like 1 or 2 pieces, right? So if we look at what processes, is it data quality, is it standardization, what is it? So I'm going to, Keith's thinking, I can't see you other guys, so you guys go ahead.
So just real quick, I would say that when you're establishing the processes, you got to get the RACI set up early on. All the players that need to be involved in that conversation need to know it in order for it to be successful.
Great.
I would agree with that. I'm sorry. I would agree with that. I think that getting the right players involved up front is extremely important. You had brought up data quality. I think that's been one of our focuses, primarily because of the multiple source systems that we have to kind of wrangle into single views. But definitely making sure that everybody understands their roles and responsibilities up front, and obviously making sure you get the right people involved.
Good. Bring us home, Keith.
Yeah, I would just say people, you guys already touched on it, but then understanding a simplistic view of your environment. So lineage and what you have in place, your entire data ecosystem is critical.
Yep, I agree. That's like the foundation of moving everything else forward, right? So I think that's it. We came in on time. So wrap us up, I guess, Victoria.
Yeah, no, I want to thank everybody for attending our webinar today, and thank you so much to our panelists for taking the time to share your experiences and your thoughts, and to Ernst for moderating everything. So we will have a recording of this webinar up on our website if you ever want to rewatch or share with colleagues. And again, thank you and have a good day.
Thank you. Thanks all panelists. I owe you. Thank you.
Take care.